What? You wake up one day and the air is different. Your thoughts are clearer. Your spirit is quieter. You haven't won the lottery. You haven't moved to a new city, and no major event has happened. What? But deep down in your bones, you know something has shifted. You've outgrown conversations that once energized you. Not because you're better than anyone, but because your frequency has changed. What? What once fed your curiosity now feels like a drain on your spirit. The excitement you used to feel in gossip, complaining, or arguing has been replaced by a deep inner craving for substance, truth, and purpose. What? You're not bored, you've simply evolved. What once lit you up now dims your light, and that's the evidence of growth, not arrogance. There was a time when the noise gave you comfort. It was familiar. What? It filled the silence you were too afraid to sit with. You laughed at the jokes even when they mocked purpose. You entertained the distractions even when they delayed destiny. But now, what? When the room starts echoing with shallow debates, with recycled fears and empty ambitions, your spirit withdraws. Even if your body stays, you find yourself more silent than before, not because you have nothing to say, what? But because what's being said doesn't deserve your voice. You notice how much energy you used to spend trying to fit into places that no longer feel like home. You'd rehearse responses, prepare opinions, what? And show up as a filtered version of yourself just to be accepted. But now you see that acceptance built on compromise as a prison. You're no longer interested in shrinking to make others comfortable. What? You'd rather sit alone in authenticity than be surrounded by noise that numbs your spirit. The more aligned you become with your purpose, the less tolerance you have for conversations that lack depth. What? You no longer want to talk about people. You want to talk about principles. You don't want to dwell on problems. You want to uncover possibilities. What? You're done talking about the why nots and the what ifs. You're focused on the what's next, the how do we grow, the how do we build, the how do we serve. Your conversations reflect your values, what? And your values have gone through a radical upgrade. And in this upgrade, you've learned the power of silence, not just externally, but internally. You no longer feel the need to fill every pause with a word, what? Every gap with an opinion. You're becoming comfortable with the language of stillness because in silence, you hear your highest self. That version of you isn't interested in debating your worth, what? Defending your choices or explaining your evolution. You've outgrown that too. There's a shift that happens when your inner world begins to expand. The outer world no longer satisfies you in the same way. What? You want conversations that activate your mind and elevate your soul. Conversations that spark vision, that birth new ideas, that remind you who you are and where you're going. What? You seek voices that speak life, not echo death. You're looking for iron to sharpen iron, not idle words to dull your edge. The shift is uncomfortable at first. You might feel isolated, misunderstood, even guilty. What? Because the people you once loved talking to now feel like strangers to your spirit. But understand this, it's not rejection, it's redirection. You're not cutting people off. What? You're cutting off patterns that no longer serve your growth. And sometimes those patterns are wrapped in familiar faces and familiar conversations. You start to crave connection that challenges you. What? People who make you think deeper, not just feel better. Dialogues that stretch your belief system and encourage you to rise higher. You begin to notice how certain voices create peace while others provoke anxiety. What? How some words unlock faith while others reinforce fear, and you realize your environment speaks even when no one's talking. You stop entertaining conversations that insult your future. What? Conversations rooted in limitation, fear, jealousy, and lack. You can't unhear truth once it's been spoken to your soul. So when someone tries to invite you back into small thinking, what? You find it impossible to re-enter the space where you once lived. Not because you're cold, but because you're called. And what you're called to requires new language, new thinking, new sound. What? And as you continue to grow, you'll be surprised by how rare meaningful conversations really are. Not because people are shallow, but because depth takes courage. You'll learn to value silence over noise. alignment over approval, and destiny over dialogue. And when you finally find someone whose words resonate with your spirit, you'll know you're not just having a conversation. You're having a divine confirmation. Your inner voice got louder than the outside world. At first, it was a whisper, a gentle nudge when something didn't feel right, a quiet knowing in the middle of chaos. What? You weren't sure what it was. You just knew it didn't come from the noise around you. It was deeper, stronger, still. It wasn't influenced by opinion, pressure, or fear. It didn't speak to your ego. What? It spoke to your essence. And slowly, you began to lean in, to listen more closely. And what you heard began to change everything you used to live by the noise. The likes, the comments, the applause, the criticism, it all shaped your choices. You asked for advice more than you asked for clarity. You trusted voices outside of you more than the one within. You allowed others to dictate your value, your pace, your dreams. You believed that volume meant truth. But now you realize truth often speaks in silence. And silence is not empty, it's full of answers. There came a moment where the outside world became too loud to think. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had peace. Every voice demanded your attention, yet none brought clarity. And in the midst of that confusion, your soul got tired of the performance. It got tired of wearing masks, of bending to expectations, of walking paths designed by people who never knew your calling. That's when the shift began. That's when the inner voice started rising. You didn't silence the world overnight, but you started choosing which voices mattered. You turned down the volume on criticism. You stopped feeding off of comparison. You let go of validation from people who didn't even know your truth. And the more you did, the clearer your own voice became. Not just clearer, wiser. It started guiding you with confidence. It no longer asked for permission to speak. It began commanding your attention. That voice began to tell you things you didn't always want to hear, but needed to. It didn't flatter you, it refined you. It called you out when you played small. It corrected you when you settled. It challenged you to stop surviving and start building. It reminded you that peace isn't found in popularity. It's found in alignment. It told you that everything you were chasing was already inside of you, waiting for you to believe again. It wasn't always comfortable, because the inner voice doesn't always say what your flesh wants to hear. It says what your spirit needs to become. And sometimes that means saying no to people you love. Sometimes it means walking away from opportunities that look good but aren't God. Sometimes, it means waiting when everything in you wants to rush. But every time you obeyed that voice, you saw how it always led to purpose. The world kept shouting, but it stopped swaying you. You stopped needing confirmation from crowds who didn't carry your vision. You stopped explaining decisions to people who weren't assigned to your journey. You stopped asking for validation in rooms you were called to lead. You stopped waiting for outside agreement and started trusting your inner authority. You realized you don't need a million voices to confirm what heaven has already spoken inside you. You started moving different, not louder, but deeper. Your pace slowed, but your clarity increased. You no longer moved out of desperation, you moved out of discernment. You didn't just react, you responded with wisdom. Because now you listen before you speak. You pause before you act. You check in with your inner alignment before you say yes to anything. And that small pause, that's the power of your inner voice becoming the anchor. People noticed the change. They couldn't explain it, but they could feel it. You didn't just grow up. You grew within. You no longer sounded like everyone else because you were no longer echoing their voices. You were now releasing your own. And when you speak now, it carries weight because it's not just words. It's truth born from obedience. It's the result of ignoring the crowd to listen to the calling. You're no longer guided by noise, timelines, or pressure. You're guided by alignment, wisdom, and faith. You've learned that the loudest voice in the room isn't always the most powerful one. Sometimes the greatest power comes from stillness, from discernment. From listening to the quiet fire inside you that refuses to be silenced. And once that voice takes the lead, everything begins to change, not around you, but within you. What? You've started walking away from what no longer reflects who you're becoming. Not because it was all bad, not because you hate anyone, but because you can no longer pretend to belong where your spirit has outgrown. What? There's a quiet moment in everyone's life where you stop chasing what once gave you comfort and begin pursuing what calls you higher. That moment isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. What? It doesn't even feel like a decision. It feels like surrender. You realize that holding on to old versions of yourself only delays the arrival of who you were born to be. You used to tolerate so much. What? Environments that drained you, conversations that misrepresented your values, friendships rooted in your insecurities instead of your identity. You stayed because it was familiar. What? Because you didn't want to disrupt the peace, even though you were sacrificing your own. But one day, the weight of staying small became heavier than the fear of letting go. What? And you didn't make a dramatic exit. You just started walking differently. Your steps became quieter, but your vision became clearer. You stopped needing closure from every chapter. What? You stopped rehearsing the same pain. You stopped trying to convince yourself that dysfunction was normal. You no longer needed someone to agree with your decision to move on. You understood that sometimes, what? The most spiritual thing you can do is walk away from what was good for who you used to be so you can make space for what's great for who you're becoming. What? There's a certain kind of courage required to walk away from things that once defined you. It's easy to leave what's broken. But what about the things that worked? Just not anymore. What? What about the people who love the version of you that you no longer want to be? What about the places that cheered for your survival, but have no room for your success? That's when walking away becomes a spiritual act, a spiritual act. It's not rebellion. It's realignment. You're not leaving in bitterness. You're leaving in clarity. There's no need to make announcements. What? You're not proving anything to anyone. You're just honoring the inner pull that says, this isn't home anymore. And it's not about the other person being wrong. What? It's about you becoming right with your purpose. You no longer ask, do they still like me? You ask, does this still reflect me? Because now you understand what doesn't match your becoming. What is slowing down your becoming? You've become sensitive to peace. What used to feel exciting now feels exhausting. What used to entertain you now feels like a distraction. What? And what used to make you feel seen now makes you feel small. You crave alignment over attention, substance over stimulation, depth over drama. What? You're not trying to fit in. You're trying to stand firm in who you've been called to be. And anything that invites you to shrink can no longer stay. What? You've even started noticing how your body reacts to certain people and places, the tension, the anxiety, the resistance. It's not random. It's revelation. What? Your spirit is picking up on what your mind used to ignore. You're learning that discomfort is sometimes divine. It's a signal that where you are is not where you're supposed to stay. What? So you're no longer negotiating with your peace. You're choosing to honor it, even if it costs you familiarity. Walking away isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just not replying, not showing up. What? Not trying to fix what keeps breaking. Sometimes it's closing a door with no ill will, only full clarity. You're not burning bridges. You're building boundaries. What? You're not being distant. You're being deliberate. Because now you understand the cost of staying connected to things that keep you from elevation. There's grief in growth. You'll mourn people who can't come. What? Places that don't feel like home. Patterns that once protected you, now exposed as limitations. But you've made peace with the fact that not everything you love is meant to last. Some things are meant to teach. What? To shape, to guide, but not to stay. And you've learned to say thank you and move forward. Not with anger, but with gratitude and grounded faith. You no longer walk for acceptance. You walk with assignment. What? Your pace has changed. Your posture has changed. You're not chasing destiny, you're becoming it. And as you walk away from what no longer reflects who you're becoming, what? You're also walking toward who you were always meant to be. Your desires got bigger, not because you're greedy, but because you finally believe you're worthy. For the longest time, what? You thought wanting more made you ungrateful. You were taught to settle, to shrink, to take just enough to survive and be thankful you got that. You internalized the idea that dreaming too big was dangerous, that reaching too high was prideful, and that abundance was for other people, not you. But something shifted, not outside, but within. You started realizing that desire is not a sin, it's a signal. What? It's a signal that your spirit has caught a glimpse of what's possible, that your heart has remembered what your soul never forgot, that you were created for more, not more for ego, not more for applause. What? But more because impact requires overflow, and overflow begins with belief. Belief that you were never supposed to play small, not to make others comfortable, and certainly not to keep tradition alive. What? The desires planted inside you didn't come from your flesh. They came from your assignment. You stopped apologizing for wanting the kind of life that reflects your potential. You used to feel guilty for dreaming of freedom, of luxury, of wealth, of influence. But now you understand wealth in the hands of the righteous is a weapon against injustice. What? Influence in the hands of the aligned is a megaphone for purpose. Comfort in the hands of the called is not vanity, it's velocity. What? It moves you faster toward your mission when you're no longer distracted by survival. You began to see how shrinking your desires didn't serve anyone. It didn't help your family. It didn't heal the world. It only kept you tired, resentful, and exhausted from trying to be okay with just enough. And you were never created for just enough. You were created for more than enough, not for status, but for stewardship. When you believe you're worthy, you stop seeing abundance as excess and start seeing it as responsibility. Responsibility to lead, to give, to build, to bless. There was a time you dimmed your dreams to match the size of your self-worth. You wanted little because you believed you were little. But once your identity changed, your vision changed. What? You started asking for more, not out of entitlement, but out of expectation. Not because the world owed you, but because your creator equipped you. Your expansion didn't start with strategy, it started with identity. What? Once you saw yourself correctly, your desires aligned accordingly. You began to want environments that challenged you, not just entertained you. You stopped settling for shallow relationships and started craving depth. What? Truth and spiritual connection. You wanted your circle to reflect your character, not just your comfort. And in every area of life, business, relationships, finances, faith, you began to stretch. What? You weren't chasing fantasy. You were stepping into God-authored capacity. You weren't pretending to be more. You were just refusing to be less. You started dreaming in detail. You stopped saying, what? I just want to be okay, and began saying, I want to be excellent. You stopped saying, whatever happens, happens, and started declaring, what? I will have what is mine in this season. You traded vague wishes for clear vision, because clarity is proof of belief, and belief is what activates bold desire. What? You're not waiting to see if it might work. You're moving as if it's already written. People may have misunderstood your shift. They may call it arrogance. But you know it's not arrogance. It's agreement. What? Agreement with what heaven says about you. Agreement with the version of yourself that no longer doubts your place at the table. Agreement with the call that has always been echoing in your soul. What? Even when your life didn't reflect it. When you believe you're worthy, you stop disqualifying yourself from blessings that were already reserved in your name. You no longer ask, is this too much? Now you ask, what? Is this in alignment? You no longer say, I'll settle for less. You say, I'll prepare for more. You no longer play the background hoping someone notices you. You step into your space with confidence. What? Knowing that your desire is an instruction, not a coincidence. That what you're reaching for is already reaching back. That you're not being excessive. You're finally being obedient to your design. What? Your desires got bigger because your vision got clearer, your faith got stronger, and your identity got upgraded. You didn't change your personality. You just reclaimed your authority. What? You're not chasing more to feel like someone. You're moving in more because you finally know who you are. And now that you refuse to ask for less than what's been promised. You said, what? You're attracting what you used to chase. Expand it and don't add any ending sentence. And make it lengthy in 10 paragraphs without heading and conclusion. ChatGPT said, you're attracting what you used to chase. What? There was a time in your life when you thought everything had to be pursued aggressively. Love, money, approval, peace. You ran toward opportunities hoping they'd notice you. What? You bent yourself out of shape just to fit into rooms you thought you needed to be in. You were exhausted, not from lack of talent or effort. What? But from constantly trying to prove that you were worthy of what you were begging for. And deep down, you believed if you didn't chase it, you'd never have it. You convinced yourself that striving was noble. What? That burning out meant you were doing it right. That hustling for attention or validation was the only way to rise. But all it did was reinforce the idea that what you wanted was separate from who you were. As if joy, what? Success and peace were distant islands you had to swim to. You chased because you didn't believe you could attract. You ran after things because you didn't know you were already enough to draw them in. What? But something changed. And it didn't happen overnight. Slowly you stopped running. You stopped proving. You stopped begging. What? You stopped showing up as a lesser version of yourself just to be seen by people who were never meant to carry your calling. You didn't become lazy. You became aligned. You shifted from striving to becoming. What? You stopped asking, what do I need to chase? And started asking, what am I becoming that naturally attracts what I desire? That inner shift changed everything. You began to focus on your energy. What? Not just your strategy. You stopped performing and started healing. You let go of attachments that weren't rooted in truth. You started walking like someone who knows their value. You spoke differently. What? You moved differently. You made peace with the idea that if it was truly meant for you, you wouldn't have to beg for it. You'd only have to become the version of yourself who could handle it. And then it happened. What? The opportunity started finding you. The people you used to beg to notice you now wanted to learn from you. The doors that used to be locked suddenly opened without you forcing them. Not because the world changed. What? But because you did. Your energy became magnetic. Your alignment became attractive. You stopped trying to chase moments and instead became a person of momentum. And when that shift happened, what? The chase ended and the attraction began. You began to realize that the law of attraction isn't about wishing. It's about becoming. What? It's not about manipulating the outside. It's about mastering the inside. When your inner world aligns with truth, your outer world reflects it. The right people, the right resources. What? The right timing, not because you forced them to, but because you became the kind of person who naturally pulls them in. You're not being lucky. You're being authentic. People around you may still be chasing, still proving, still forcing, but you no longer envy the hustle. You've seen what alignment can do, and now anything that requires you to shrink, hustle, what? Or beg doesn't interest you. You know that being still in your truth is more powerful than being loud in your fear. You don't chase anymore, not because you're lazy, but because you're walking in authority. What? And the beautiful part is what you're attracting now isn't just shiny. It's solid. It's not fake connections. It's divine partnerships. It's not surface opportunities. It's purpose-aligned doors. What? You're not attracting what looks good. You're attracting what feels right because you've done the work to be right within. You've cleared the noise. You've healed the wounds. What? And now your energy speaks louder than your words ever could. You no longer panic when things seem delayed. You don't spiral when someone doesn't respond. You don't cling to things out of fear of losing them. What? Because you've learned that what is for you will always find you. Not when you chase it, but when you become it. You trust divine timing. You trust your growth. What? You trust that attraction happens at the level of your belief, not your effort alone. You've entered a space in life where effort is still required, but not desperation. You work from rest, not anxiety. What? You lead with confidence, not scarcity. You no longer chase attention, opportunities, or people, because what you used to chase is now drawn to the version of you who no longer needs to run after it. What? You attract because you finally aligned with the truth of who you are and who you're becoming. You no longer identify with your past, only with your future. What? There was a time when your past held the pen and wrote the script of how you saw yourself. Your mistakes had a louder voice than your potential. The memories of failure, pain, and regret created a ceiling over your identity. You would introduce yourself to new seasons still wearing the labels of old wounds. You were walking into open doors while dragging closed chapters behind you. Hoping no one would notice how heavy they were. You used to rehearse your story in your mind like it was your only truth. This is just how I am. This is how it's always been. People like me don't get far. The past became your explanation and your excuse, even when opportunities came, even when breakthrough knocked. You filtered everything through your history. You didn't realize it at the time, but you were letting your past dictate your present posture and your future decisions. It wasn't your environment holding you back. It was your memory of who you used to be. But something broke. Something shifted. Not through force, but through revelation. You stopped carrying your past like a badge of identity and started seeing it for what it was, a classroom, not a cage. You realized the past didn't define you. It refined you. It wasn't meant to imprison you. It was meant to inform you. And once that awareness hit your spirit, the grip of yesterday began to loosen. You began seeing your past as part of the story, not the author of it. You started thinking differently. You caught yourself when the old narrative tried to sneak in. You noticed how your language changed. You no longer spoke as someone who was trying to recover. You began to speak as someone who was rising. The language of victimhood was replaced with the language of vision. You no longer said, look at what I've been through. You began saying, look at what I'm walking into. You stopped being a product of your past and became a prototype of your purpose. The shift wasn't about denial. It was about perspective. You didn't erase what happened. You just stopped bowing to it. You gave yourself permission to heal, not just cope. You stopped replaying trauma like a favorite song. You stopped glorifying pain as if it gave you value. You found value in your calling, not your chaos. The past taught you, yes, but it no longer owns you. You took back the keys and handed them to your vision. You started making decisions based on where you're going, not where you've been. You began asking, does this serve the future me? Instead of, is this familiar? You started walking in rooms you used to feel unqualified for. You started applying for opportunities you once disqualified yourself from. You didn't wait to feel ready. You moved as if you already were, because your belief began to match your future, not your history. You weren't trying to escape your past. You were finally done repeating it. You no longer find comfort in familiar dysfunction. You no longer seek out chaos just because peace feels foreign. You don't cling to old habits, old people, or old places just to feel safe. You've outgrown survival. Now you're building, you're planning. You're preparing for overflow. You've realized the future you desire requires a new version of you, and you're no longer afraid to become that version, even if it costs you your past identity. There's freedom in knowing you owe your past nothing. You've repaid the pain with growth. You've repaid the delay with discipline. You've repaid the brokenness with breakthrough. Now you walk differently, not because life got easier, but because you got clearer. You're not running from the past, but you're also not building a house there. You've set your eyes forward, your faith higher. And your feet on purpose. And now, every step reflects a person who's done apologizing for who they used to be. People might still bring up the old you, but you don't flinch anymore. Their memory doesn't have authority over your destiny. You don't get defensive, you stay focused. Because you know that who you were is not in conflict with who you are. It's just a previous chapter. And every chapter had a purpose, even the painful ones. But now you're writing from the lens of power, not pain. From vision, not victimhood. What? You no longer recognize yourself in the rearview mirror because the person you see ahead is too clear, too bold, too aligned to be ignored. What? You've stopped letting your past introduce you and started letting your future define you. And with every step forward, what? You're proving that you don't have to repeat the past to honor it. You just have to rise high enough that it becomes your foundation, not your identity.